Hey everyone, quick video for you today. Now today I want to show you all something that I've only seen one other time before researching these ancient sites. And thank you to ZiggyDan for helping me find this and remember this. I had looked into this site thanks to one of Vlad's recent videos. I was looking into one of the nearby temples and saw one of the columns and it reminded me of something. Dan and I had some discussion, and I was able to recall the other site. And today I want to show you all something very, very strange. So these two sites are the only two sites that I've ever seen this before. Now we've seen nubs on polygonal stonework in South America. We've seen nubs on bevel blocks and other blocks, but we've never seen nubs on columns before. And at both of these sites, multiple columns have multiple nubs on them in very strange arrangements. So today I want to show you all the examples and just get your all's feedback on what they could mean. Does this mean that these are geopolymer or some kind of advanced concrete? Now I know in Matt at Ancient Architect's recent video, he talks about the H blocks and some of the other blocks at Pumapunku potentially being geopolymer, and that stirred up a lot of discussion. And you know I'm open to that possibility for some of these sites. So let's look at some of these pictures, but before we do, I want to go look at some information on these sites just to give you all a groundwork of where we are and when we are in time. So this one, the Temple of Garni, is in Armenia. If you guys have been reading while I've been talking, you probably see the structure was probably built by King Tiridates. Now that probably, it's very interesting to me. You start scrolling down, you realize the dating comes from a stone they found in a nearby cemetery that has an inscription that says Tiridates dedicated the temple or started the temple. I'm not sure if that means he built the temple. It doesn't explicitly say. But there's some interesting alternative theories. Basically, the range is about 300 years from the 1st century all the way up to 175 AD. I think could be even older, and I don't know why they don't propose older. It could be older, but I think the confliction comes from the style. It is a classical Greek style, but also has some Roman influence, they say. Obviously, I think so too. I think the Greek and Roman styles overlap in a lot more ways than people realize, and the history of the styles go back a lot farther than people realize. So you see the Ionic capitals. That's supposed to be older than the Corinthian columns, the Corinthian capitals. The more ornate stuff came later. The Doric, the very simple style, was the first. And all the architectural flowery details and embellishments, all that stuff was developed over time. That is what the Orthodox theory is. Now this temple suffered an earthquake in the 60s, I believe, and it's very interesting when they put it back together. It shows you the resilience of these sites. 80% of the structure was salvageable and able to be put back together. So most of the site here is original. There's going to be a few repairs. It's going to be obvious, I think. But for the most part, the site is still the original pieces. So that's something to consider at this site and other sites that we've looked at as well. When they rebuild these sites, when they restore them, how well of a job they can do with the ruins if they're all still there and have not been scavenged or looted. You guys know I like to focus on the physical evidence, the pictures, the ruins themselves, and not go too much into the stories because I feel like we can be swayed. But there are some interesting things that pop up when we do look into the stories. For example, the name of this temple, Garni, it is named after a village nearby, or maybe the village is named after the temple, Garni. And over here in Jerash, Jordan, the other site we're going to look at today, there's a very old village nearby, Garshu, or Gerasa. Very interesting. I was trying to see if either other site came up in the search on the page, but nope. Jerash does not come up on the Garni page, and Garni does not come up on the Jerash page, even though, according to my research and ZiggyDan, these two sites are the only two sites we've ever seen that have these connected hallmarks. So does that mean ZiggyDan and I are the first two to notice this? I just don't see that being possible. There's too many other researchers looking into these sites. Someone else before us has to have noticed this, but it's just odd that I've never heard of this before. Never seen it pointed out by any of our alternative researchers. So I think ZiggyDan and I are going to be the first two to present this to you guys. Now the oval forum at Jerash, this is the area we're going to be talking about today, even though there are some interesting things around Jerash we're also going to point out, but mainly we're going to be talking about this oval forum. It's dated to the Greco-Roman period, so we're talking about approximately the same time period for both sites, but of course there's a very disputed range here. We're talking 300, 500 years maybe, who knows. So let's get right to it. Let's look at some photos here. These are some of the best photos I could find, both sites, and I also found some supplementary photos of some structures nearby. Jerash, very interesting. Talk about those later. So, to begin, the oval column plaza here. First, I noticed the square holes and rectangular holes, indentations in the columns. I had seen this site maybe 6 months ago, looking for bevel blocks at this site, and I thought, oh, those are interesting. They kind of follow me, the square holes, they follow me around looking at these ancient sites, but I didn't really think much of it. I came back to it a few days later, looking at more photos, and I found this one and a few others, and I said, wait a minute, some of those squares are not indentations or holes, they're actually nubs. I said, wait a minute, is this picture messing with me? Is this a poor quality photo that has done something here, processing in the photo that's caused these anomalies? Is this some kind of watermark? And then I start looking down the colonnade, and they seem to be on all of the columns. In random places too, they're not uniform. Some of them are. Some of these up here look pretty uniform, but some of these other ones are pretty randomly spaced and oriented. They're not all square either. Some of them are on their diagonal a little bit. And I thought, what could that be from? Does that mean that these are cast? I think that's a very highly likely possibility, guys. What else could these be from? I think these are from where two halves of a cast were put together, and this is where the spout, the hole was for the material to be poured into, and part of it oozed out the top, causing the nub. That's the only thing I can think of. Now we're going to have to look at how many nubs are on each of the column segments here. So far, I see just about one per column segment, which would make sense for a mold. You wouldn't need more than one filler hole for your liquid material. Again, each segment perhaps only has one of these nubs on them. I have not seen any segments that have multiple nubs. Each segment seems to only have one. Now you get up to the capitals. If this is one piece, I see a nub here and a nub over here. Perhaps there would be multiple filler spouts for complex pieces like a capital. Something to think about. And you also see some of the columns have some pitting in them. Perhaps those are air bubbles in the mix. And again, the way they're all randomly oriented, some of these column segments might be turned, the nubs might be turned, so they're not facing us, but we can presume that all of these column segments have at least one nub on them, and so far I've only seen one nub per segment. That's really indicative of molding to me, guys. That sounds like injection molding to me. Concrete forms, liquid geopolymer forms. I love this photo, this overview photo. The material they show in the foreground, these cornice elements or header pieces, broken pieces, you see all the little squares in them. These were probably pegs keeping all the pieces together. Very interesting. All this stuff seems pretty uniform. There might be a grain to some of it. We can dispute that, but perhaps this is concrete, guys. You see some of the weathering on some of these surfaces, the staining. Maybe this is lichen and algae. It's hard to tell. Maybe a combination of all those things. Acid rain for however long these have been here. But I want to say that these blocks all look pretty similar, and the cornices all look pretty similar. Looks like it could be from a similar concrete batch, geopolymer batch, as the columns are too. There's a little variation in the colors of the columns, but for the most part, they're all pretty much the same shade. I mean, some of these dark ones here, maybe something happened there. Maybe there was a fire, they had a fire here. But for the most part, I think they're all pretty much the same shade and the same grain, lack of grain, and even the floor. Look at the floor, how tightly fitting that is, the blocks, and even if you look close here, I don't know how to describe this. If we just want to say this is weathering on the surface of these blocks, but it also looks like a rough, I mean, it does look concrete-like. Who knows if this has been patched and repaired? You can see other little areas here definitely has. But they all look pretty similarly weathered. Now, what do we attribute the holes to? Again, that's something else entirely, I think. I don't know if we can say that has something to do with molding process, because we see that at other sites and other bedrock formations. We see the square holes and indentations at almost all of our sites. So they could be attachment points for banners, decorative things, scaffolds, lifting aids. I think they could be all kinds of different things, guys. I'm not going to try to limit that to one thing, because it seems almost like just a technology that they incorporated this square technology in a lot of different things. You know, the column segment attachments, the cornice attachments, all kinds of different things. So let's jump over to Garni in Armenia here. Now these sites are really relatively close to each other geographically. So, you know, the fact that they look similar, it's not too crazy. But these nubs, again, it's one of those things that we see on other sites, but we also see it in South America too. So regionally, yes, but also globally. Now, there's some other interesting things we want to talk about at this site. But first, clearly there's nubs on these column segments, guys. And I want to say one on each one. I don't see multiples again. Some of these other ones may be turned away from us, right? But here's one, definitely. Here's one, definitely. I'll zoom in all the way until it gets pixelated just to prove the point. Here it is, and here it is. And some other areas look like holes. I can almost see some of these have been knocked off. Maybe some of these were nubs that got knocked off and then patched. I could see that in some of these cases. Repair efforts. Just they didn't realize what was going on with these. And you got to remember that this site collapsed because of an earthquake. So the fact that you have all this ornate stuff left too and everything, it's all still very impressive. It is interesting though that I don't see many nubs on the columns over here on the right. They're mainly on a couple of columns over here on the left. But again, the site has been repaired. I see square patch pieces in some of these column segments. So maybe a lot of these nubs have broken off and the repair efforts obscured them. Now we saw that at the tomb of Cyrus the Great, where they were covering up some of those square holes in the tomb, perhaps because they didn't know why they were in the structure, and I don't blame them. But here, maybe some of these nubs were broken off, and the patches obscured where they were broken off from. Very interesting though. So we have two sites here, the only two sites I've ever seen where the nubs are incorporated into column segments. Usually that is only a hallmark of blocks, bevel blocks, and polygonal blocks. So what does that say about the polygonal blocks and the bevel blocks? I'd like to open that up to discussion. I think we might be dealing with geopolymer in all cases. Now, surprisingly, this site does not contain any bevel blocks. The lower foundation and the inner structure is all finely dressed masonry. There are no bevel blocks at this site. the structure looks like something, the temple looks like something that should be on the Acropolis of Athens, and it's so perfectly carved and perfectly proportioned. Now we see some bevel blocks in Athens, in some structures in some areas, but even there it's not entirely uniform. And normally you would see them in structures like this, in these temples, you would see them mainly down here in the foundation. But even down here in the foundation, these are all finely dressed stones. Now, I'm sure you're seeing the elephant in the room here, so let's go ahead and talk about that. All the holes here. What's all this hole damage in these blocks in the foundation? What could cause that? What's the reasoning behind that? Now ZiggyDan and I were talking about this, and I proposed just one possibility, guys, that maybe these holes could be from scavengers coming along trying to get the metal clamps out of the structures. If these blocks had metal clamps holding them together, then perhaps a group of people, a small group of people, maybe one person, I don't know, could have come along with their metal tool and chiseled into the blocks to see if there were any clamps at the joints. And maybe some cases there were, other cases there weren't. And that's what causes all this damage. And perhaps in some of the other structure as well. But I don't understand what else that could be from. The earthquake couldn't have done that, could it? The structure collapsed more than likely, the columns and the inner structure, but this foundation probably stayed together. Even if it didn't, would that cause the damage that you see? I really don't know. I see this at other sites like Ephesus, where we see the same kind of half-round damage in blocks, usually at the joints, above the joints of other blocks, areas where you would think there might be clamps. That is why I proposed it. But it's just really anomalous damage, and I don't know what to think about it. It extends all around the structure on all sides, but only at the foundation like this. This photo has kind of a crazy perspective, but it's pretty good quality, and again, you can see the damage. Some of it, I could say, might have been natural from the cataclysm, earthquake damage, but some of this other stuff is it just all lines up all along that seam. I'm not sure. Well, what could that have been from? I really don't know. And then, of course, let's point out the other elephant in the room, the small square filler stones. It's not as apparent in this photo, the quality's not that great, but you can see at the corners, at the junctions of all the blocks, there are small square filler stones. More of the damage, and I'm going to have to assume the lighter pieces over here are the later restoration repair pieces, and up at the top too, later repair pieces. Yeah, I suppose this is the best quality photo for the square filler stones here at the corners. Is this repair work? I'm not sure. This looks like old stone. It doesn't look like the lighter, newer pieces. It looks weathered. Was this original? It's a very interesting construction technique. I'm not sure. Extends all the way around the building too. So that's some really wild stuff, I think. I've never seen nubs on columns like that before. The two sites are interesting in and of themselves, beyond just the nubs. Also here at Jerash, I want to bring this up at the end, Temple of Zeus, and maybe some other structures. I'm not sure if this is all the same structure, but I found bevel blocks here at the Temple of Zeus. You see them down here in the foundation. These are bevel blocks. And down here in these lower structures, I think that's pretty obvious. Those are bevel blocks. Very strange dimensions on some of the blocks, right? Maybe these are trapezoidal openings in the windows. Some of these other ones look pretty square though. How about this structure? I love the bevel blocks in this structure. I wish I had this earlier on in the series. Look at these. These are amazing. They're all molded together like that. Strange dimensions. What's this piece about? Right? Strange dimensions here. These seem to be thinner all along the top. Almost decorative. Over here, over the arch. Look at that. That is very impressive. In different dimensions and different bevels and bosses, depths. Interesting other decorative stuff up here. And other finely dressed stones. Another angle, great contrast here. I think it's pretty obvious. All these are bevel blocks. Here's an interesting photo I found. This kind of reminded me of Baalbek, where they have the cornice elements, the really nicely carved, sumptuously carved stuff that has fallen off. They just have it organized laying around. And some of this stuff does look like it could be molded concrete. I'm open to that. I'll leave that open. And you see some other columns that have, this site is really interesting. It has some columns, fluted columns that aren't just straight flutes. It also has spiral fluting on some of the columns, and that's really impressive, however they did that. And of course you see some of these other column segments in the background with all the pitting and the holes in them. Some of it may be damage, some of it may be air pockets, poor quality stone, I don't know. Open to both. Corinthian capitals, so we should think that these are later than the Ionic style or the Doric style. Another angle of that same area. I really like this photo. It shows you some of these rows of square holes. What is that about? Now, like I proposed earlier in some of my earlier videos, rows of holes that are wedge holes for splitting stones, like we see in Egypt and some other places. Are they all wedge holes, or was this something else going on? Here, obviously, something else is going on. Now, you can see in the background another one of these column segments with a spiral fluting. Very impressive. And when you see intact columns, really impressive. Also interesting pieces, though. The carved cornices. These were originally supposed to be up at the top and not down the ground. And if that wasn't wild enough for you, how about this photo? Another area nearby, still in Jerash. You see the square holes. I'll point them out if you don't. Here, here, and maybe a few up here in the top. Definitely here, and one here. But then you start looking closer, and you see all the small ones. Now, what are those? You can't get any closer than this before it gets pixelated, but all the little holes peppered throughout. Is this rifle fire? Is this air pockets in the mix? It's in almost every single block. And some of these have very faint margins on them. Maybe these are bevel blocks. More than likely the lower blocks are bevel blocks and these are finely dressed, but the same culture made both. I can see some instances here that might be bevel blocks. Yeah, down here in the bottom, these are bevel blocks. So, what is all the holes about? And what are these? This was probably more than likely the installation of something. Maybe a statue. There's another one right there. I don't know what else to attribute the big ones to. And then finally, one more good quality photo here of the Temple of Zeus. Really impressive. Corinthian columns. Big column segments, though, you see person for scale. Definite bevel block foundation. Drive that home. That's definitely bevel block foundation. You see it goes around the corner and turns into finely dressed. Very interesting. So again, side by side, the two surface treatments. So same culture, could do both. Down here in the lower areas, these are cruder. There's some mortar in between. Maybe this was secondary structures with some of the original construction materials. But I'm going to say some of this stuff up here has to be original the way it's fitted. So, very interesting stuff at both sites, especially the nubs on the column segments. I've never seen that anywhere else except these two sites. Thank you again to ZiggyDan for helping me remember. Thank you guys for hanging out with me and for putting up with my snoring dog. And we will talk to you next time.